faced with the most blatant evidence. If we don't want to change, we won't change. And now I speak for myself too. I'm preaching, preachers always preach to themselves. Because what you have invested in terms of theology, to beloved teachers, marvelous grandmothers, grandfathers, and beloved relatives, when you get it this high, it's very deep interest, believe me. I've observed that. And I can prove it easily. For instance, when you meet ex-Herbert Armstrong people, you will find that the shadow of obligatory Sabbath keeping hangs over them almost forever. So when we went mixed with some of them 30 years on, after they'd come out 30 years later, their theology was defined by which day of the week you're really observing. Believe me, it was. I was amazed at that. These are the lessons that God teaches us as we walk around and mix with different people. Or other groups, their theology is defined by when did you get Holy Ghost? I've been in that environment recently. Their whole theology is, well, you got converted, yes, but when did you really get Holy Ghost, you see? I didn't hear that language here. That isn't particularly your definition. So each denomination has its definitional points, and we cling to those like Olympics, until some kind person like Harry Tennant came to me and said, "Oh man, Anthony, your stuff about God the Son is wrong." I said, "Come on, give me a break." I'm retelling the story, because sometimes you do have to say things several times. And there's some new people here. I see somebody smiling in the back, so they're awake there. But Harry Tennant said to me, a couple of things wrong. One is you believe in the devil, and I still do. I didn't change that one after 2 years. But your point about God the Son is just wrong. And I'd never really thought about it. But we said, God, we've been so beaten down by the Armstrong movement, so shattered, and our guru turned out to be a rogue, although we paid our 3 tithes dutifully. And there's where the sucker thing really applied. Absolutely right. We were completely bamboozled by the preacher with his thundering voice, you see. I've come out of that. I could not do what I'm doing now at all if I had not been through that experience. So I'm blessing God for allowing us to stumble around under the influence of a guru who knew nothing about language at all, couldn't quote you a Greek word or a Hebrew word, but he'd had 6 months in a prayer closet praying to God for truth, dropped from heaven like an apostle, and he's got all the answers. I'm against that. You cannot bypass the process by saying, well, God made me an apostle, and just fed it into my brain. And I don't think it works that way. We all have to do our homework. I really think we have to do our homework right now. So the name of the game then is to say, where have I been influenced, possibly adversely? And then you pray, as we've said before, the Bible prayer, God, undeceive me. Should I be deceived here and there? And then you keep your eyes and ears open, see if anybody comes along to you and says, you might want to consider possibly this view. Possibly. It doesn't make it right, but at least you investigate it. I'm in love, in a sense, then, with that Mozart of theology. Yeshua, Jesus, right? He turns up in the temple, and he confronts the DDs and the PhDs of his day. And they're amazed at his acuity. Mary taught him awfully well, because he had a huge advantage of being the Son of God, literally. And that's one of those very easy truths that you can open to Luke and simply show your friends that Mary had a baby. Would you imagine that Luke and Matthew are saying a pre-existing angel or son one day decided not to be an angel any longer, or decided not to be God any longer, and entered into the womb. So Mary received, not conceived, she received the baby from outside. Is that what Luke wrote? I don't think so. It's self-evidently wrong. And when you see the truth, the error really is pretty silly, isn't it? When you see it. And I warn you against complexity. I believe that the biblical doctrines are essentially rather simple. And if you begin crying parable, allegory, don't take it literally, you may be in trouble. Normally you're going to take the text at face value. You simply say, what does this word mean? You go to your best lexicons, look it up, and go from there. But once you begin to start philosophizing and saying, well, it couldn't be this because we know so-and-so, and in those days they used to do so-and-so, then you may be in trouble. If only because you're separating yourself from all of your brethren sometimes, who haven't said allegory, parable. They've simply said the text appears to say this, and that's what it means. Now, of course there's allegory in the Bible, we know that. Those figures of speech. You know that trees don't clap their hands, right? So I'm not asking you to believe that trees clap their hands. That's clear. No argument about that. But if you go to a Japanese person and you use the phrase about pulling my leg or pulling your leg, they have no idea what you mean. So the lesson there is you've got to be a first century Jew to some extent to understand the language of Jesus. And don't forget the mad about my fat syndrome. I'm mad about my fat means I'm excited about my partner. In America it means I'm furious about my flat tire. You must give Jesus, I think, the honor of being a first century Jew. That's going to take some learning now. Go to your best books. I think Bailey was mentioned and others, Edison. Go to the standard works today. There's such a vast volume of information like we never had before on the sort of things Jews would say. I mean, let me give a classic example. I might step on a toe here. It doesn't matter. Allow me to finish. Nobody's looking threatening here. This is great. But if somebody comes and says, well, Jesus had to have been crucified on Wednesday and raised on Saturday, because you don't say 3 days and 3 nights. Stop. First of all, everybody else in Bible scholarship doesn't believe that, except one German back in 1700. You could just be wrong. And you might have to investigate the possibilities of Hebrew idiom. And you might even have to go and read in German a Strackwiller Beck commentaries on the Talmud and the Mishnah. It's not in English, I wish it were. A fund of information on what sort of things Jews might say, which wouldn't make a lot of sense to you today. But you see, the cult and the guru trades on having some little definitional things different from everybody else. I think that's a business technique, isn't it? I think Mark's cleaners, have some very special thing that's going to get him into the market. I mean, that's a fair thing. But in theology, if you come along and hear somebody say, well, there are 2 thieves either side of Jesus, not one either side. Whoa! Boy, that's interesting. And then you've got the hooks. So anything that's wacko, if you've got a doctrine that really has barely been believed by anybody for 2,000 years, is not supported by any credible, responsible, state-of-the-art commentary, not that they're always right, but if you've got that kind of wacko doctrine, be careful. And if it disagrees with all the rest of your Unitarian brethren everywhere, at least be careful. Now, you still can have it right. But I rather think that there is a sort of balancing effect of community here. We need each other so much. There's nothing worse than being on an island and making up all your own definitions. And honestly, I promise you that nothing that certainly I've said, and I think you have said this weekend, there's nothing here that couldn't be substantiated by good, honest scholarship, Catholic and Protestants. I've got letters in my bag, I didn't bring them, but nice letter from Hans Kung. He's fairly famous. Hans Kung is a big name in Germany. He says, well done, Anthony, I like the Trinity book, good stuff, keep at it. That's total approval. F.F. Bruce wrote to me many times in private conversation, and what he admitted there to me in letters was amazing. He says things like, evangelicals can be just as much slaves of tradition as the Roman Catholics that they condemn. That's a wise thing. He says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and is it a which or a who? He's not sure. And F.F. Bruce said to me privately, he said, I'm not sure that Paul believed in a pre-existent Son at all. I don't think he probably did. Paul didn't. No, I think John maybe did, possibly did. You see where we're going there? Now James Dunn has come along and opened that whole thing up, and the incredible quote that Greg gave us, that these men like Dunn and Bishop of Durham are saying, they're trying to give the New Testament back. And I stop at a sentence like that and I hear, give it back? You mean you don't think they've got it now? If you're giving it back, it suggests that they really don't have it now. So those men are very much along our lines. All of which is to say that you are not little sectarian nuts with some wacko stuff. That we need to avoid. We need to be able to speak to scholars, to everybody, right? With the simplicity of the truth. And yet with a certain amount of learning to back it. And that's why your teachers are so important. They really are. You want to watch the little ones and see, here are the teachers of the future. Not everybody's a teacher, clearly. In fact, James 3 says, don't be too many teachers because you're going to get judged more harshly. And a nice paradox there, on this hand, on the other hand, nice paradox. In Hebrews it says, by the time you've been in church, you should be teachers by now. So get busy teaching, right? And Paul, when he was in prison, said, I'm thrilled in a way that now the members of the church are getting bold to speak about the gospel. Seems to imply they didn't speak about it before, doesn't it? Paul was doing all the work, the poor guy. He was the one getting kicked out of the church and stoned after death. It seems to suggest that all of us in the church have some sort of responsibility to share these truths. I take it then the exercise we do in a conference like this is to train ourselves. It would be a seminar training so that we can go and say, have you ever thought of God being one, not three?